The employees in Suite 601, which took up the entire north half of the floor, had no warning. Scythe Goddard and his scythe strode to the center of activity. "Attention," he announced in full theatrical voice. "Attention all! You have been selected for gleaning today. You are commanded to step forward and meet your demise." Murmurs, gasps, and cries of shock. No one stepped forward. No one ever did. Goddard nodded to Chomsky, Volta, and Rand, and the four advanced through the maze of cubicles and offices, leaving nothing living in their wake. "I am your completion," intoned Goddard. "I am your deliverance. I am your portal to the mysteries beyond this life." Blades and bullets and flames. The office was catching fire. Alarms began to blare, sprinklers gushed forth icy water from the ceiling, and the doomed were caught between fire and water, and the deadly sights of four master hunters. No one stood a chance. "I am your final word, your Omega, your bringer of peace and rest. Embrace me." No one embraced him. Mostly people cowered and pleaded for mercy, but the only mercy shown was the speed at which they were dispatched. "Yesterday you were gods, today you are mortal. Your death is my gift to you. Accept it with grace and humility." So focused were the sights that none of them noticed Rowan slipping out behind them and crossing to Suite 602, where he pounded on the glass door until someone came and Rowan could warn him what was coming. "Take the back stairs," he told the men. "Get as many out as you can. Don't ask questions. Just go!" If the man had any doubts, they were chased away by the sounds of desperation and despair coming from just across the hall. A few minutes later, when Goddard, Volta, and Chomsky were done with Suite 601, they crossed the hall to find Suite 602 empty, save for Rowan swinging his fire hatchet at computers and desks and everything in his path, doing exactly as he was told to do. The sights moved faster than the flames, faster than the flow of workers trying to escape. Volta and Chomsky blocked two of the three stairwells. Wren made her way to the main entrance and stood like a goalie. Taking out anyone trying to escape through the front doors. Goddard spouted his ritualistic litany as he moved through the panicked mob, switching his weapons as it suited him, and Rowan swung his hatchet at anything that would shatter, then secretly directed whoever he could toward the one unguarded stairwell. It was over in less than 15 minutes. The building was in flames, the helicopter was now hovering above, and the Scythe strode out of the front entrance, like the four horsemen of the post-mortal apocalypse. Rowan brought up the rear, dragging the hatchet on the marble until he dropped it with a clatter. Before them were half a dozen fire trucks and MB drones, and behind that, hordes of survivors. Some ran when they saw the Scythes come out, but just as many stayed, their fascination overcoming their terror. "You see," Goddard told Rowan, "the firefighters can't interfere with the Scythe's action. They'll let the whole thing burn down, and as for the survivors, we have a wonderful public relations opportunity." Then he stepped forward and spoke loudly to those who hadn't fled. "Our gleaning is complete," he announced. "To those who survive, we grant immunity. Come forward to claim it." He held out his hand, that one that bore his ring. The other Scythes followed his lead into the same. No one moved at first, probably thinking it was a trick. But in a few moments, one ash-stained employee stumbled forward, followed by another and another, and then the entire mob was apprehensively coming toward them. The first few knelt and kissed the Scythe's ring, and once the others saw that this was for real, they surged forward, mobbing the Scythes. "Easy," shouted Volta. "One at a time." The same law mentality had propelled their escape, now pushed them forward those life-saving rings. All of a sudden, no one seemed to remember their dead co-workers. Then, as the crowd around them got denser and more agitated, Goddard pulled back his hand, removed his ring, and handed it to Rowan. "I tire of this," said Goddard. "Take it. Share in the adoration. But I can't. I'm not ordained." "You can use it if I give you permission as a proxy," Goddard told him. "And right now you have my permission." Rowan put it on, but it wouldn't stay, so he switched it to his index finger where it was a bit more snug. Then he held out his hand as the other sides did. The crush of people didn't care which finger the ring was on, or even whose hand it was on. They practically climbed over one another to kiss it, and to thank him for his justice, his love, and his mercy, calling him Your Honor, not even noticing he wasn't a Scythe. "Welcome to a life as a god," Scythe said to him, while behind them the building burned to the ground. "We are wise but not perfect, insightful but not all-seeing. We know that by establishing the Scythedom, we will be doing something very necessary, but we, the first Scythes, still have our misgivings. Human nature is both predictable and mysterious, prone to great and sudden advances, yet still mired in despicable self-interest. Our hope is that by a set of 10 simple, straightforward laws, we can avoid the pitfalls of human fallibility. My greatest hope is that, in our time, our wisdom will become as perfect as our knowledge, and if this experiment of ours fails, we have also embedded a way to escape it. May the Thunderbird help us all if we ever need that escape." From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Prometheus, the First World Supreme Blade. Thank you for the likes. Chapter 26. Not like the others. That night they feasted, although Rowan could not dig up an appetite, no matter how deep he mined. Goddard ate enough for everyone. He was invigorated by the day's hunt, like a vampire sucking in the life force of its victims. He was more charming, more suave than ever, saying things to make everyone laugh. How easy, thought Rowan, to fall in with him, to be stroked into his elite club, just as the others had been. Clearly, Chomsky and Rand were cut from a similar cloth as Goddard. They held not the slightest illusion of conscience, but unlike Goddard, they had no delusions of grandeur. They gleaned for sport, for the joy of it, and as a Scythe, Rand so accurately put, because they can. They were more than happy to wield their weapons while Goddard inhabited his role as the Angel of Death. Rowan couldn't be sure if the man believed it, or if it was all artifice. Theatricality to add flair to the show. Scythe Volta, though, was different. Yes, he stormed the office building and gleaned his share, just as the others had, but he had said little as their god machine carried them home across the sky. And now, at dinner, he barely touched the food on his plate. He kept getting up to wash his hands. They probably thought nobody noticed, but Rowan did. And so did Esme. Scythe Volta is always cranky after gleaning, Esme leaned over to tell Rowan. Don't stare at him, or he'll throw something at you. Halfway through dinner, Goddard asked for a final count. We gleaned 263, Rand told him. We're ahead of our quota now. We'll have to glean fewer next time. Goddard slammed his fist down on the table in disgust. The damn quota hobbles us all. If it weren't for the quota, every day we could be like today. Then Goddard turned to Scythe Volta and asked how his task was coming. It was Volta's job to set appointments with the families of the deceased so that they could be granted the obligatory immunity. I've spent the whole day reaching out to each family, Volta said. They'll be lining up at the outer gate first thing tomorrow morning. We should let them onto the ground, Goddard said with a smirk. They can watch Rowan train on the lawn. I hate the bereaved, Rand said as she stabbed the fish. I cannot speak. I hate the bereaved, Rand said as she stabbed a fresh piece of meat with a fork and dragged it into her plate. They always have such awful oral hygiene. My ring reeks after an hour of granting bereavement immunity. Unable to stomach any more, Rowan excused himself. I promised Esme I'd play cards with her after dinner, and it's getting late. There was no truth in that, but he threw a glance to Esme, and she nodded, pleased to be part of an impromptu conspiracy. But you'll miss the creme brulee, said Goddard. More for us, said Chomsky, shoving a forkful of prime rib into his maw. Rowan and Esme went to the game room and played gin rummy, mercifully just undisturbed by talk gleaning quotas and the kissing of rings. Rowan was thankful that the suicide king held a monopoly on misery in this room. We should get others to join us, Esme suggested. Then we can play hearts or spades. You can't play those games with just two. I have no interest in playing cards with the Scythes, Rowan told her flatly. Not them, silly. I mean the servants. She picked up his discarded 9, the second one he fed to her, as if he didn't know she was collecting them. Letting her win today was payment for helping him escape the dining room. I play cards with the pool man's son sometimes, she told him, but they don't like me very much on account of this used to be their house. Now they all share a room in the servants' quarters. Then she added, You're sleeping in one of their rooms, you know, so I bet they don't like you much either. I'm probably sure they don't like any of us. Ooh. Whatever. Probably not. Maybe it was because Esme was young, but she seemed entirely oblivious to the things that weighed so heavily on Rowan. Perhaps she knew better than to question things or to pass judgment on what she saw. She accepted her situation at face value and never spoke ill of her benefactor, or more accurately, her captor, for she was clearly Goddard's prisoner, even though she might not see it that way. Hers was a gilded cage, but it was a cage nonetheless. Still, her ignorance was bliss, and Rowan decided not to shatter the illusion that she was free. Rowan picked up an ace, which he needed for his hand, and discarded it anyway. Does Goddard ever talk to you? He asked Esme. Of course he talks to me, she said. He's always asking me how I am and if there's anything I need. And if there is, he always makes sure I get it. Just last week I asked for a... No, not that kind of talking, said Rowan, cutting her off. I mean real talking. Has he ever hinted as to why you matter so much to him? Esme didn't answer. Instead, she laid down her cards. 9 over 3s. Rummy, she said. Loser shuffles. Rowan gathered the cards. Scythe Goddard must have had a good reason to let you live, and to grant you immunity. Aren't you at all curious? Esme shrugged, and stayed tight-lipped. It was only after Rowan dealt the next hand that she said, Actually, Scythe Goddard didn't grant me immunity. He can clean me any time he wants, but he doesn't. Then she smiled. That makes me even more special, don't you think? They played 4 games. 1 Esme won fair and square, 2 Rowan let her win, and 1 Rowan won. So it wouldn't be as obvious that he had thrown the others. By the time they were done, dinner had broken up, and the others were going about their particular evening routines. Rowan avoided everyone and tried to go straight to his room, but on his way he heard something that gave him pause. There was faint sobbing coming from Scythe Volta's room. He listened at the door to make sure it wasn't his imagination, then turned the knob. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it open slightly and peered inside. Scythe Volta was there, sitting on the bed, head in his hands. His body heaved with sobs that he tried to stifle, but could not. It was a few moments before he looked up and saw Rowan. Volta's sorrow instantly turned to fury. Who the hell said you could come in here? Get out! He grabbed the nearest object, a glass paperweight, and hurled it at Rowan, just as Esme had suggested he might. It would have left a pretty nasty gash on Rowan's head had it connected, but Rowan ducked and the thing hit the door. leaving a substantial dent in the wood instead of Rowan's skull. Rowan could have retreated. That probably would have been the most judicious course of action, but leaving well enough alone was not Rowan's strong point. He was notoriously skilled at sticking his nose where it didn't belong. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, preparing to dodge the next blunt object hurled his way. "You have to be quieter if you don't want anyone to hear you," he told Volta. "If you tell anyone, I will make your life a living hell." Rowan laughed at that because it implied his life wasn't already that. "You think that's funny? I'll show you funny." "Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. I wasn't laughing at you, if that's what you think." Since Volta was no longer throwing things and wasn't chasing him out, Rowan grabbed a chair and sat down, far enough away to give Volta some space. "Today was hard," Rowan said. "I don't blame you." Alright. What do you know about it?" snapped Volta. "I know you're not like the others," said Rowan. "Not really." Volta looked up at him then, his eyes red from tears that he didn't try to hide anymore. "There's something wrong with me, you mean?" Volta looked down again, clenching his fists, but Rowan didn't move because he didn't expect to get a beating. He suspected that Volta would use his own fists against himself if he could. "Scythe Goddard is the future," Volta said. "I don't want to be a part of the past. Don't you understand?" "But you hated today, didn't you? Even more than me, because you weren't just watching, you were part of it. And you'll be part of it soon, too." "Maybe not," said Rowan. "Oh, you will be. The moment you get your ring and kill that pretty little girlfriend of yours, you'll know there's no turning back for you either." Rowan swallowed, trying to fight down what little bit of dinner he had eaten. Citra's face bloomed in his mind, but he pushed the image away. He couldn't let himself think about her now. Rowan knew he was out on a limb with Volta. The only thing to do was shimmy to its precarious sin. "You only pretend to like cleaning," he told Volta, "but you hate it more than you've ever hated anything. Your mentor was Scythe Nuru, right? He's very old school, which means he chose you for your conscience. You don't want to take life, and you definitely don't want to take dozens upon dozens at a time." Volta leaped up, moving faster than seemed possible. He lifted Rowan up and pushed him against the wall with a bruising slam that made Rowan sorely miss his pain-killing nanites. "You will never repeat that to anyone. Do you hear me? I've come too far to have my position jeopardized. I won't be blackmailed by a snot-nosed apprentice. Is that what you think I'm doing? Blackmailing you?" "Don't toy with me," growled Volta. "I know why you're here." "I thought you knew me." Rowan was genuinely disappointed. A moment more and Volta loosened his grip. "Nobody knows anyone, do they?" he said. "I promise I won't tell anyone, and I don't want anything from you." Volta finally backed off. "I'm sorry. After you've been surrounded by so much scheming, you start to think that's how everyone plays. In fact, I knew from the moment Goddard brought you in. He sees you as a challenge because if he can turn one of Faraday's apprentices to his way of thinking, it proves he can turn anyone." Then it occurred to Rowan that Volta wasn't all that much older than him. He had always feigned a confidence that made him seem older, but now his vulnerability revealed the truth. He was 20 at most, which meant he'd only been a Scythe for a couple of years. Rowan didn't know the path that led him from an old guard Scythe to Goddard, but he could imagine. He could see how a junior Scythe might gravitate toward Goddard's flash and charisma. After all, Goddard promised his disciples anything a human heart could desire, in exchange for the complete abdication of one's conscience. In a profession where conscience was a liability, who would want one? Rowan sat down again and pulled his chair close enough to Volta to whisper, "I'll tell you what I think," Rowan said. "Goddard isn't a Scythe. He's a killer." It's the first time it was the first time Rowan dared to say it aloud. There's a lot written about killers from the mortal age, monsters like Jack the Ripper or Charlie Manson or Cyber Sally. And the only real difference between them and Goddard is that people let Goddard get away with it. The mortals knew how wrong it was, but somehow we've forgotten. Yeah, but even if that's true, what can anyone do about it? Said Volta. The future comes whether we want it to or not. Rand and Chomsky and the dozens of other sick, twisted bastards longing to be in a Goddard's inner circle are going to dominate the future. That future. I'm sure the founding Scythes must be rolling in their graves. But the point is, they are in their graves, and they're not coming back anytime soon. Waldo took a deep breath and wiped the last of his tears. For your sake, Rowan, I hope you come to love killing as much as Goddard does. It would make your life so much easier, so much more rewarding. The suggestion weighed heavily on him. A month ago, Rowan would have denied that he could ever become such a monster. But now, he wasn't so sure. Pressure to surrender was greater every day. He had to hope that if Volta had never truly surrendered to the darkness, then maybe he might stand a chance as well. There is no official media coverage of gleanings, much to the chagrin of the more publicly minded Scythes. Not even large Scythe gleanings get on the news. Even so, plenty of personal pictures and videos of gleanings are uploaded to the Thunderhead, providing a guerrilla record, which is so much more exciting and enticing than anything official. Notoriety and infamy quickly evolve into celebrity and fame for Scythes. The most brazen acts harden further into legend. Some Scythes find the fame addictive and seek greater and greater celebrity. Others would rather remain anonymous. I cannot deny that I am legend, not for the simple gleanings I do now, but for the audacious ones I did more than 150 years ago. And if I weren't already immortal enough, I am further immortalized on collectible cards. The newer ones were prized by school children. The older ones are worth a fortune to hardcore collectors, regardless of the condition. I am legend, yet every day I wish that I was not. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 27. Harvest Conclave. Citra's secret investigation led to some surprises she couldn't wait to share with Rowan when she finally saw him at Harvest Conclave. She certainly couldn't share them with Scythe Curie. The two had come to trust each other, and the Scythe would have seen Citra secretly using her online credentials as a flagrant violation of that trust. Citra's life had taken a very different turn from Rowan's. She did not attend loud, lavish parties, nor did she train against live subjects. She helped cook quiet meals for the heartbroken families and sparred with a black belt Bokatar bot. She created tinctures and studied the practical use of deadly poisons inside Curie's personal apothecary and toxic herb garden. She learned about all the infamous acts of both the best and the worst Scythes in history. In the past, it was usually laziness, prejudice, or lack of foresight that made a bad Scythe, Citra had discovered. There were those who seemed to glean too many neighbors because they couldn't be bothered to look farther. There were those who, in spite of repeated disciplinary action, would glean people with specific ethnic traits. As for poor judgment, there were plenty of examples there as well, such as Scythe Satyr, who thought it was a good idea to do all of his gleanings at rodeos, thereby destroying the sport entirely, since no one could attend a rodeo for fear of being gleaned. Of course, the bad Scythes weren't all in the past, but instead of bad, they were now called innovative and forward-thinking, like the innovative bloodbaths of Scythe Goddard and his killer cronies. The mass gleaning at Magnetic Propulsion Laboratory, although never reported officially, was big news. And there were plenty of private videos uploaded to the Thunderhead, showing Goddard and his disciples doling out immunity like bread to the poor. Rowan was right there in the middle of it. Citra didn't know what to think about that. The world has a talent for rewarding bad behavior with stardom, said Scythe Curie, as she viewed some of the videos that had been uploaded. Then she got a bit pensive. I know the pitfalls of being a celebrity, Scythe. I was headstrong and stupid in my early days. I thought that by gleaning just the right people at just the right time, I could change the world for better. I believed in my arrogance, that I had a keen grasp for the big picture that others lacked. But of course, I was just as limited as anyone else. When I gleaned the president and his cabinet, it shook the world. But the world was already shaking just fine without me. They called me Miss Massacre, and as time went on, that changed to the Grand Dame of Death. I spent more than 100 years trying to fade into anonymity. I can't say that word. But even the youngest of children know me. I am the boogeyman parents use to get their children to behave. Be good, or the Grand Dame will get you. Scythe Curie shook her head, sadly. Most celebrity is fleeting. But when you're a Scythe, your defining deeds stand forever. Take my advice, Citra, and remain undefined. You might be a celebrity, Scythe, Citra pointed out, but even at your worst, you were nothing like Goddard. No, I wasn't. Thank goodness, Scythe Curie said. I never took life for sport. You see, there are some who seek celebrity to change the world, and others who seek it to ensnare the world. Goddard is the second kind. And then she said something that guaranteed Citra many a sleepless night. I wouldn't trust your friend Rowan anymore. Goddard is as corrosive as acid hurled in the eye. The kindest thing you can do is win that ring. can do is win that ring when Winter Conclave comes, and glean the boy quickly before that acid burns any deeper than it already has. Citra was glad that Winter Conclave was still months away. It was Harvest Conclave she had to worry about. At first, Citra had looked forward to September and the Harvest Conclave, but as it approached, she began to dread it. It wasn't the upcoming test that troubled her. She felt she was prepared for whatever trials would be thrown at the apprentices. What she dreaded was seeing Rowan, because she had no idea what all these months with Goddard had done to him. But the clock never stopped ticking. It moved inexorably toward one of their deaths. Harvest Conclave took place on a clear but blustery September day. While a storm had kept many spectators away from the last conclave, they gathered in force today on the street before the Fulcrum City Capitol building. Even more peace officers than before were posted to keep the gawking crowds back. Some Scythes, mostly old guard ones, arrived on foot, choosing a humble walk from their hotels over a more flashy arrival. Others, pulling up in high-end cars, choosing to make the most of their celebrity status. News crews aimed their cameras, but mostly kept their distance. This was, after all, not a red carpet. No questions, no interviews. But there was certainly a lot of preening. Scythe waved to the camera and squared their shoulders, standing tall so they'd look their best on screen. Scythe Goddard and his crew showed up in a limousine, royal blue studded with mock diamonds, just in case there was any question as to who was inside. As Goddard and his entourage emerged, the crowd oohed and awed, as if their dazzling appearance rivaled a display of fireworks. "There he is! It's him! He's so handsome! He's so scary! He's so well-groomed!" Goddard took a moment to turn to the crowd and sweep his hand in a royal wave. Then he focused on one girl from the audience, held her gaze, pointed at her, then continued up the stairs, saying nothing. "He's so strange. He's so mysterious. He's so charming." As for the girl he singled out, she was left impressed and terrified and confused by his momentary attention, which is precisely the intent. So focused was the crowd on Goddard and his colorful entourage, no one much noticed Rowan bringing up the rear as they climbed up the steps to the entrance. Goddard's crew weren't the only Scythes up for the shows. Scythe Kierkegaard had a crossbow slung over his shoulder. Now, not that he had any intention of using it today, it was merely a part of the spectacle. Still, he could have aimed at just about anyone in the audience and taken them out. The knowledge of that made the crowd all the more excited. No one had ever been gleaned on the Capitol steps before a conclave, but that didn't mean it couldn't happen. While most Scythes approached down the main avenue, Scythe Curie and Citra made their entrance from a side street to avoid being the focus of the crowd's attention for as long as possible. As the stately Scythe pushed through the crowd of onlookers, a rumble erupted from the people closest to her as they realized who it was moving among them. People reached out to touch her silky lavender robe. She endured this as a matter of course, but one man actually grabbed the fabric, and she had to slap his hand away. "Careful," she said, meeting his eye. "I don't take kindly to the violation of my person." "I apologize, Your Honor," said the man. Then he reached for her hand, intent on touching her ring, but she pulled her hand away from him. "Don't even think about it." Citra pushed away in front of Scythe Curie to help her clear a path for her. "Maybe we should have taken a limo," Citra said. "At least that way we wouldn't have to fight our way through." "That's always been a little too elitist for me," Curie said. As they cleared the crowd, a sudden gust came down the wide Capitol steps, catching Scythe Curie's long silver hair and blowing it back like a bridal train, making her look almost mystical. "I knew I should have braided it today," she said. As she and Citra climbed up the white marble steps, someone to their left shouted, "We love you!" Scythe Curie stopped and turned, unable to find the speaker, so she addressed them all. "Why?" she demanded, but no. Under her cool scrutiny, no one responded. "I can end your existence at any moment. Why love me?" Still, no one answered, but the exchange attracted a cameraman, who moved forward, getting a little too close. Scythe Curie smacked the camera so hard it wrenched the man's whole body around, and he nearly dropped it. "Mind your manners," said the Scythe. "Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, Your Honor." She continued up the steps with Citra behind her. "Hard to imagine that I used to love this attention. Now I'd avoid it entirely if I could. We didn't seem this tense at the last conclave," Citra noted. "That's because I didn't have an apprentice being tested. Instead, I was the one testing other Scythe's apprentices." A test that Citra had failed spectacularly, but she didn't feel like bringing that up. "Do you know what today's test will be?" Citra asked as they reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the entry vestibule. "No, but I do know that it's being administered by Scythe Cervantes, and he tends to be very physically minded. For all I know, he'll have you tilting at windmills." As before, the Scythes greeted one another in the grand rotunda, waiting for the assembly room doors to open. Breakfast was set out on the tables in the center of the rotunda, featuring a pyramid of Danish that must have taken hours to assemble but seconds to fall as Scythes carelessly took the lower Danish, without regard to the ones above. The waitstaff scrambled to gather the fallen pastries before they could be ground underfoot. Scythe Curie found it all very amusing. It was foolhardy of the caterer to think that Scythe would leave anything in a state of order. Citra spotted Junior Scythe Goodall, the girl who had been ordained at the last conclave. She had her robes made by Claude de Glace, one of the world's preeminent fashion designers. It had been a monumental mistake, because today's designers were all about shocking people out of their happy place. Scythe Goodall's orange and blue striped robe made her look more like a circus clown than a Scythe. Citra couldn't help but notice how Goddard and his junior Scythes were the center of even more attention than at the vernal conclave. Although there were a number of Scythes who turned a cold shoulder, even more crowded them, seeking to ingratiate themselves. There are more and more Scythes who think like Goddard. Scythe Curie said quietly to Citra. "They've slipped between the cracks like snakes, infiltrating our ranks, supplanting the best of us like weeds." Citra thought about Faraday, a decent Scythe most certainly choked out by the weeds. "The killers are rising to power," Scythe Curie said, "and if they do, the days of this world will be very dark indeed." "It is left to the truly honorable Scythe to stand firm against it. I look forward to the day you join in that fight." "Thank you, Your Honor." Citra had no problem fighting the good fight if she became a Scythe. It was the events that would lead up to it that she couldn't bear to consider. Scythe Curie went off to greet several of the old guard Scythes who held true to the founders' ideas. That's when Citra finally spotted Rowan. He didn't bask in the false glow of Goddard. Instead, he was his own little center of attention. He was surrounded by the other apprentices and even a few junior Scythes. They chatted, they laughed, and Citra found herself feeling slighted that Rowan hadn't even sought her out. Rowan had, in fact, tried to find her, but by the time Citra entered the rotunda, Rowan had already been set upon by unexpected admirers. Some were envious of his position with Goddard. Others were just curious, and others were clearly hoping to attach themselves to his rising star. Political positioning started young in the Scythedom. You were there at the office building, weren't you? One of the other apprentices said. A spat, one of the new ones at the conclave for the first time. I saw you in the videos. He wasn't just there, said another spat. He had Goddard's freaking ring, handing out immunity. Wow, is that even allowed? Rowan shrugged. Goddard said it was, and anyway, it wasn't like I asked him to give me his ring. He just did it. One of the junior Scythes sighed wistfully. Man, he must really like you if he let you do that. The thought that Goddard might actually like him made Rowan uncomfortable, because the things that Goddard liked, Rowan categorically despised. So what's he like? One girl asked. Like no one I've ever met, Rowan told her. I wish I was his apprentice, said one of the spats, then grimaced like he had just been bitten into like a rancid cheese Danish. I was taken on by Scythe Mal. Scythe Mal, Rowan knew, was another showboater, enjoying the celebrity of his public image. He was notoriously independent, and he didn't align himself with the old guard or the new. Rowan didn't know if he was a man who voted on his own conscience or sold his vote to the highest bidder. Faraday would have known. There were so many things Rowan missed about being Faraday's apprentice. The inside scoop... hand cramp. The inside scoop was one of them. Goddard and his junior Scythe totally owned the Capitol steps when they came up, said an apprentice Rowan remembered from last conclave, the one who knew his poisons. They looked so good. Have you decided what color you'll be, and what jewels you'll have on your robes? A girl asked, suddenly hanging on his arm, like a fast-growing vine. He didn't know which would be more awkward, pulling out of her grip or not. Invisible, said Rowan. I'll come up the State House steps naked. Those'll be some jewels, quipped one of the junior Scythes, and everyone laughed. Then Citra pushed her way through, and Rowan felt as if he was caught doing something he shouldn't. Citra, hi, he said. It felt so forced. He just wanted to take it back and find another way to say it. He shrugged out of the vine girl's grip, but it was too late, because Citra has seen it. Looks like you've made a lot of friends, Citra said. No, not really, he said, and then he realized he just insulted them all. I mean, we're all friends, right? We're in the same boat. Same boat, repeated Citra with deadpan dullness, with daggers in her eyes as sharp as the ones that used to hang in Faraday's weapons den. Good to see you too, Rowan. Then she strode away. Let her go, said the vine girl. She'll be history after the next conclave anyways, right? Rowan didn't even excuse himself as he left them. He caught up with Citra quickly, which told him she really wasn't trying at all that hard to get away. This was a good sign. He gently grabbed her arm, and she turned to him. "Hey," he said, "I'm sorry about back there." "No, I get it," she said. "You're a big deal now, and you have to flaunt it." "It's not like that. Do you think I wanted them all fawning over me like that? Come on, you know me better." Citra hesitated. "It's been 4 months," she said. 4 months can change a person. That much was true, but some things hadn't changed. Rowan knew what she wanted to hear. That would just be another dance, another bit of posturing. So he told her the truth. "It's good to see you, Citra," he said. "But it hurts to see you. It hurts a lot. And I don't know what to do about it." He could tell that reached her, because her eyes began to glisten with tears, that she blinked away before they could spill. "I know. I hate that it has to be this way. I'll tell you what," said Rowan. "Let's not even think about Winter Conclave right now. Let's be in the here and now, and let Winter Conclave take care of itself." Citra nodded. "Agreed." Then she took a deep breath. "Let's take a walk. There's something I have to show you." They walked along the outer edge of the rotunda, passing the archways where Scythe wheeled and dealed. Citra pulled out her phone and projected a series of holograms into her palms, cupping it so no one but Rowan could see. "I dug these out of the Thunderhead's back brain." "How did you do that?" "Never mind how. What's important is that I did, and what I found." The holograms were of Scythe Faraday on the street near his home. "These are from his last days," said Citra. "I was able to retrace at least some of his steps that day. But why? Just watch." The hologram showed him being let into someone's home. "That's the house of the woman he introduced us to at the market. He spent a few hours there. Then he went to this cafe." Citra swiped to another video showing him going into the restaurant. "I think he may have met someone there, but I don't know who." "Okay," said Rowan. "So he was saying goodbye to people. So far it seems consistent with things someone would do if it was their last day on Earth." Citra swiped again. The next video showed him going up to the stairs to a train station. "This was 5 minutes before he died," said Citra. "We know that it happened at the station, but guess what? The camera on that train platform had been vandalized, supposedly by unsavories. It was down for the entire day, so there's no visual record of what actually happened on that platform." A train pulled out of the station, and a moment later a train pulled in, heading in the other direction. That was the one that killed Faraday. Although Rowan couldn't see it, he grimaced as if he had. "You think someone killed him and made it look like he did it himself?" Rowan looked around to make sure that they weren't being observed and spoke quietly. "If that's your only evidence, it's pretty weak." "I know, so I kept digging. But it only makes sense that those witnesses would have gone up those stairs too, right? There were 18 people who went up the stairs around the time that Faraday died. Some of them probably got on this first train." She pointed to the train leaving the station. "But not all of them. Of those 18 people, I was able to identify about half of them, and 3 of them were granted immunity that very day." It was enough to take the wind out of Rowan and make him feel lightheaded. They were bribed to say it was self-cleaning? If you were just an ordinary citizen and witnessed one side killing another, and then were offered immunity to keep your mouth shut, what would you do? Rowan wanted to believe he'd seek justice. But he thought back to the days before he became an apprentice, when the appearance of a scythe was the most frightening thing he could imagine. I'd kiss the ring and keep my mouth shut. Across the rotunda, the doors of the conclave chamber opened, and the scythes began to file in. Who do you think did it? Rowan asked. Who had the most to gain by getting Faraday out of the picture? Neither of them needed to say it out loud. They both knew the answer. Rowan knew that Goddard was capable of unthinkable things, but would he kill another scythe? Rowan shook his head, not wanting to believe it. That's not the only explanation, he told her. It might not have even been a scythe at all. Maybe it was the family member of someone he gleaned, someone who wanted revenge. Anyone could have taken his ring, pushed him into the path of the train, and used the ring to give immunity to the witnesses. They'd have to stay quiet then, or they'd be considered accomplices. Citra opened her mouth to refute it, but closed it again. It was possible, even though using Faraday's ring would have frozen the killer's finger. It was possible. I didn't think of that, she said. Or what about a tonist? The tone cults hate scythes. The rotunda was quickly emptying, and they left the conclave. They left the alcove and moved toward the chamber doors. You don't have enough facts to accuse anyone of anything, Rowan said. You should let it sit for now. Let it sit? You can't be serious. I said, for now. You'll have full access to the Scythestone's records once you're ordained, and you'll be able to prove exactly what happened. Citra stopped in her tracks. What do you mean, once I'm ordained? It could just as easily be you. Or is there something I'm missing? Rowan pressed his lips, furious at himself for this slip. Let's just get inside before they close the doors. The rituals of conclave were just as they had been before. The tolling of the dead, the washing of hands, grievances, discipline. Once again, an anonymous accusation was leveled against Scythe Goddard, this time accusing him of handing out immunity too freely. But he does. Who brings this accusation? Goddard demanded. Let the accuser stand and identify his or herself. Of course, no one took credit, which allowed Goddard to retain the floor. I will admit that this accusation has merit, Goddard said. I am a generous man and have perhaps been too liberal in my doling of immunity. I make no excuses and am unrepentant. I throw myself on the mercy of the High Blade to levy my punishment. The High Blade Xenocrates waved his hand dismissively. Yes. Just sit down, Goddard. Your penance will be to shut up for the whole 5 minutes. That brought a round of laughter. Goddard bowed to the High Blade and took a seat. And although a few scythes, including Scythe Curie, tried to object, pointing out that historically, scythes who overused their ring had their power to grant immunity limited to the families of the gleaned. Their complaints fell on deaf ears. Xenocrates overrules all objections in the interest of speeding up the day's proceedings. Amazing, said Scythe Curie quietly to Citra. Goddard's becoming untouchable. He can get away with anything. I wish someone would have had the foresight to glean him as a child. The world would be better off. Citra avoided Rowan at lunch, afraid that being seen together more than they already had been might raise suspicion. She stood by Scythe Curie for lunch, and Scythe introduced Citra to several of the greatest living Scythes. Scythe Mayor, who had once been a delegate to the Global Conclave in Geneva. Scythe Mandela, who was in charge of the Bejeweling Committee, and Scythe Hideyoshi, the only Scythe known to have mastered the skill of gleaning through hypnosis. That's pretty cool. Citra tried not to be too starstruck. Meeting them almost gave her hope that the old guard could triumph against the likes of Goddard. She kept glancing over at Rowan, who, once more, couldn't seem to get away from the other apprentices, although she didn't know how hard he tried. "It's a bad sign," said Scythe Hideyoshi, "when our young hopefuls gravitate so openly to the enemy." "Rowan's not the enemy," Citra blurted, but Scythe Curie put a hand on her shoulder to quiet her. "He represents the enemy," Scythe Curie said, "and at least he does those other apprentices." It was generally agreed among the old guard, Scythe Mandela side, there shouldn't be enemies in the Scythedom. We should all be on the same side, the side of humanity. It was generally agreed among the old guard that these were troubling times, but aside from raising objections that were repeatedly dismissed, no one took action. Citra found herself getting increasingly I'm bug. Kinda wet. Blah blah blah. Things like whether a scythe's ring should be worn in the left or right hand, and whether or not a scythe should be allowed to endorse a commercial product, like running shoes or a breakfast cereal. It all seemed insignificant to Citra. Why should any of that matter when the hallowed act of gleaning was slowly devolving into mortal age murder? Good question, girl. Good question. Right? Then, at last, came time for apprentice tasks. As before, the candidates for Scythedom went first, having been tested the night before. Of the 4 candidates who made it through their final test, only 2 were ordained. The other 2 had to suffer the walk of shame as they exited the chamber and went back to their old lives. Citra took guilty pleasure at the fact that the girl who had been sucking up to Rowan was one of those ejected. That's what you get. Once the new Scythes were given their rings and took their new names, the remaining apprentices were called down front. "Today's test," announced the Scythe Cervantes, "will be a competition in the martial art of Bokatar. The candidates will be paired and judged on their performance." A mat was brought in and rolled out in the semicircular space in front of the restroom. Citra took a deep breath. She had this. Bokatar was a balance among strength, agility, and focus, and she had found her perfect balance. And then they stuck a blade right in the heart of her confidence. Citra Telernova will spar against Rowan Demish. I cannot talk. La 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 la. Murmur from the crowd. Citra realized this was no random draw. They were paired intentionally, doomed to be adversaries. How could it be any other way? Her eyes met Rowan's, but his expression gave away nothing. The other matches went first. Each apprentice gave their best, but Bokatar was a bruising discipline, and not everyone's strength. Some victories were close, others were routs, and then it came time for Citra and Rowan's match. Still, Rowan's expression gave her neither camaraderie nor sympathy, nor misery at having to be set against each other. "Okay, let's do this," is all he said, and they began to circle each other. Rowan knew that today was his first true test, but not the one they had devised for him. Rowan's test was to look convincing, but still throw the match. Goddard, Xenocrates, Cervantes, and, for that matter, all the Scythes assembled, needed to believe he was doing his best, but that his best just wasn't good enough. It began with the ritualistic rhythmic circling, then posturing and physical taunting. Rowan launched himself at Citra, threw a kick that he telegraphed with his body language, and missed her by a fraction of an inch. He lost his footing and fell down on one knee. A very good start. He turned quickly, rising, remained off balance, and she lunged toward him. He thought she would take him down with an elbow strike, but instead she grabbed him, pulling him forward even as she appeared to push him back. It brought him to balance and made it appear as if her move had failed, that she didn't have the leverage to do the job. Rowan backed away and caught her gaze. She was grinning at him, her eyes intensely on his. It was part of the taunting that Bokatar was known for, but this was so much more. He could read her just as clearly as if she were speaking aloud. "You're not going to throw this match," her eyes said. "Fight badly, I dare you. Because no matter how poorly you try to fight, I will find a way to make you look good." Frustrated, Rowan launched himself to hurt again. An open palm strike on her shoulder, intentionally 2 inches off from the perfect leverage point, but she actually moved into it. His palm connected, she spun back with the force of a strike and went down. Damn you, Citra. Damn you! She could beat him at everything, even at losing. Citra knew from the moment Rowan made his first kick what he was up to, and it infuriated her. How dare he think he had to fight badly for her to win this match? Had he grown so arrogant at her Scythe Goddard that he actually thought this wouldn't be a fair fight? Sure, he had been training, but so had she. So what if he had grown stronger? That also meant that he was bulkier and slower. A fair fight was the only way to keep their consciences clean. Didn't Rowan realize that by sacrificing himself, he'd be dooming her as well? She would sooner glean herself as her first act as a Scythe than accept his sacrifice. Rowan glared at her now, furious, and it only made her laugh. "Is that the best you can do?" she asked. Ow. He threw out a low kick, just slow enough for her to anticipate, and without any force behind it. All she needed to do was lower her stance and the kick would have no effect. Instead, she responded by raising her center of gravity, just enough for the kick to knock her feet out from under her. She fell into the mat, but righted herself quickly so it would look as if she had done it on purpose. Then she threw her shoulders against him and hooked her right leg around his, applying force but not enough to make his knee buckle. He grabbed her, twisted, flipped them both down to the mat, landing her in the dominant position over him. She countered by forcing him to roll over and pin her. He tried to release her, but she held his arms in place so he couldn't. "What's the matter, Rowan?" she whispered. "Don't know what to do when you're on top of a girl?" Oh, He finally pulled away and she got up. They faced each other one more time, circling in the familiar battle dance, while Cervantes circled them in the other direction, like a satellite, completely missing what was really going on between them. Rowan knew the match was almost over. He was about to win, and by winning he would lose. He must have been crazy thinking Citra would allow him to willingly throw the match. They both cared too much about each other. That was the problem. Citra would never willingly accept the Scythe's ring as long as her feelings for him got in the way. And all at once, Rowan knew exactly what he had to do. With only 10 seconds left to the match, all Citra had to do was keep up the dance. Rowan was clearly the victor. 10 more seconds of guarded circling and Cervantes would blow the whistle. But then Rowan did something Citra hadn't anticipated at all. He threw himself forward with lightning speed, not clumsy nor feigning false incompetence, but with perfect practiced skill. And in an instant he had put her in a headlock, squeezing her neck tight enough for her pain nanites to kick in. And then he leaned close and snarled into her ear. "You fell right into my trap," he said. "Now you get what you deserve." Then he flung her body into the air, twisting her head the other way. Her neck broke with a loud and horrible snap, and darkness came over Citra like a landslide. Rowan dropped Citra to the ground as the crowd drew a collective gasp. Cervantes blew his whistles violently. "Illegal move! Illegal move! Disqualification!" The gathering of Scythe began to roar. Some were furious at Cervantes, others were spouting vitriol at Rowan for what he had done. Rowan stood stoic, letting no emotion show. He forced himself to look down at Citra's body. Her head was twisted practically backward. Her eyes were open, but no longer seeing. She was deadish as deadish could be. He bit down on his tongue until it began to bleed. The chamber door swung open and the guards traced in, hurrying toward the deadish girl in the middle of the room. The high blade came up to Rowan. Go back to your Scythe," he said, not even trying to hide his disgust. "I'm sure he'll discipline you accordingly." "Yes, Your Excellency." Disqualification. None of them realized that to Rowan, it was the perfect victory. He watched as the guards picked up Citra and carried her, limp as a sack of potatoes, outside to where, no doubt an ambudrone was already waiting to take her to the nearest revival center. "You'll be fine, Citra. You'll be back with Scythe Curie in no time, but you won't forget what happened today. And I hope you never forgive me." I forgot. I fought against the Purge. There are things I've done that I am not proud of, but I am very proud that I fought against that. I can't recall which Scythe began that odious campaign to glean only those who were born mortal, but it spread throughout each regional Scythedom, a viral idea in a post-viral time. Shouldn't those who were born to expect death be the sole subjects of gleaning? Went the popular wisdom. But it was bigotry masquerading as wisdom, selfishness posing as enlightenment, and not enough Scythes argued, because those born in this post-mortal age found mortal-borns to be too uncomfortably different in the way that they thought, and in the way that they lived their lives. "Let them die with the age that bore them," cried the post-mortal purists in the Scythedom. In the end, it was deemed a gross violation of the Septon Commandment, and all those Scythes who participated in the Purge were severely disciplined, but by then it was too late to undo what had been done. We lost our ancients, we lost our elders, we lost our living lifeline to the past. There are still mortal-borns around, but they hide their age and their history, for fear of being targeted again. Yes, I fought the Purge, but the Thunderhead did not. By its own law of non-interference in Scythe affairs, it could do nothing to stop the Purge. All it could do was bear witness. The Thunderhead allowed us to make that costly mistake, leaving the Scythedom to wallow in its own regret to this very day. I often wonder, should the Scythedom run entirely off the rails and decide to glean all of humanity in a grand society of global gleaning, would the Thunderhead break its non-interference law and stop it? Or would it bear witness again as we destroyed ourselves, leaving nothing behind but a living cloud of our knowledge, accomplishments, and so-called wisdom? Would the Thunderhead grieve our passing, I wonder? And if so, would it grieve as the child who has lost a parent, or as the parent who could not save a petulant child from its own poor choices? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie.